Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar today. My name is Matt Schillerstrom, and I'll be talking to you about empowering developers to safely author and deploy database changes. So just a quick introduction as well. I'm a director of product management at Harness. I work on a few different solutions. I've been on DZone talking about chaos engineering in the past, but today talking about databases. I also work on feature flags and site reliability engineering stuff with AI. So happy to be here to talk about databases. I'm also a community builder for an open source project through the CNCF called Litmus Chaos. And my background, I've worked at Target.com as a DevOps SRE engineer, worked at a nuclear power plant for 13 years, where I learned all about software reliability. And previous to Harness, I worked at Gremlin, which was the first chaos engineering startup, and I came to Harness to help build our chaos engineering product. But yeah, today just databases. So if you have questions about that, feel free to ask in the Q&A. All right, a little bit about Harness. We were founded in 2017 by Jyoti Bansal, who had previously created AppDynamics and sold that to Cisco prior to this. We've been a leader in the DevOps platform for Forrester. We have 900 plus customers. We have millions and millions of pipeline runs from all of our different customers, from banking to retail, to all that as well. And a little bit about our Harness platform. We span the whole software delivery lifecycle. When I first joined Harness 3 years ago, we had just a handful of modules. Now we have across the whole software delivery lifecycle. So I'm excited today to talk to you about database DevOps specifically. The plan for today is to talk about modern continuous delivery, why database matter to CD, like what is database DevOps and how database DevOps helps, and then a demo and a Q&A as well. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I have a QR code there. I have it at the end as well, but happy to network with you, chat, or set up a one-on-one as well. Every presentation, I always Google outages that happen today, because I usually talk about software reliability, but databases have reliability as well. And when I Googled database outages today, this popped up from yesterday, and I haven't fact checked the details, so I don't know if the title is entirely correct. But database changes disrupt services for millions, right? And usually I talk about applications going down, but databases can go down as well, right? And that's usually a really, really bad day, because sometimes you lose data, right? And you have to restore from backup, which is horrible rollback plan. But otherwise, rolling out new features that have database change requirements can cause disruption, right? A lot are attributed to infrastructure changes for sure. But in a lot of cases, it's with a new application rollout that has a new schema that's supporting that new feature. But I hope this presentation convinces you that you need to apply database DevOps to your modern tech stack. And here I just have a little meme, right? But from the Matrix, the red and blue pill, I want you to embrace database DevOps, or I guess keep manually processing schema changes, having issues, staying up late, all that stuff. But yeah, hopefully you didn't take both pills, but hopefully by the end of this presentation, you take the red pill to kind of go with that. What I'll also say before I jump into the next slide too, if you look at the resources, feel free to click into there. We're going to have a few polls. We'll have slides pulled up, and our host will help us. But more importantly, Q&A, if you pop questions in there, I will answer that at the end, and we'll have a good time today. All right, so for this first poll, question number 1, I'll have our host pop that up, and you can just click go to poll and answer that. But I'm just curious, how are you managing database schema changes today, right? So if you're rolling out a new feature for your web app or your mobile app or whatnot, your retail shop, and you have to add a new field or change something, right? How are you managing your schema changes today, right? Whether that's manually, scripted outside the CI/CD process, inside the CI/CD process, or a commercial tool, or just creating a ticket for the database team, right? In my history of working with databases, I was more on the application side, so I had really good friends and coworkers that managed databases, but it was generally outside of the CI/CD process. We would roll out a new feature capability, time it with a database change, and then just kind of gradually roll it out with feature flags and stuff like that, which are a great way to do this. But yeah, as I look at the poll and everything, like I'm seeing, some that are scripting outside and then some that are inside. So it's great to see that as well. I'm not seeing any like emailing or slacking the database administrator, but maybe you're just pinging them to see like when it's getting done or whatnot if you're having issues. So that's great to see as well. All right, I will continue on. All right, so modern software delivery, right? It wouldn't be a presentation today if I didn't talk about AI a little bit. So, I'm throwing out some stats here on our, the modern software delivery and what we're seeing, right? So, where does software engineering time go when you look at it today, right? So, with software development, we're seeing 30 to 40% time in that plan and code. And that's improving as well, right? With vibe coding and all that kind of stuff as well. But then we're seeing on the other side, 60 to 70% doing testing, secure deployment, optimize, right? So these are all things, if you look at your day, like how are engineers, how are DBAs spending their day? If you look at the whole life cycle, like software delivery, if you itemize it, involves 30 plus complex workflows, right? When I was a product manager at Target, the first time I had that role coming out of an engineer, I was also writing down like all the things, all the jobs that I had to do, right, to release a feature and do day to day. And it basically looked like this, right? 30 plus things, if not more. And that's a lot of toil on developers, engineers, DBAs, the product team, and the like, right? And it's, that's what we have to fix and solve, right? And it's just getting more complex as we go. Like workflows today are very manual and full of toil. And we see velocity issues, efficiency issues, security, and resiliency issues, right? And what that looks like at the end of the day is like AI coding is increasing like the software delivery choke point. And vibe coding, as many people talk about or experimenting, is just increasing that drastically. Even at being in the product team, like I'm able to use some applications like Lovable or Vercel or name your favorite tool that can help you create code. But I can do it really quickly, but it's also really crappy because I'm not a really good engineer anymore. But it's enabling me to generate ideas. But if you take a really seasoned engineer, junior, or principal, like they can create great code very quickly, but they still have to think about that choke point of like how they're going to test it, secure it, deploy it, and optimize it. But today, right, like the database, hey, don't forget about me with the database, because I still see, right, as we talk about modern CD here in a few minutes, we keep forgetting about databases, right? And we absolutely need to think about database DevOps and breaking down the silos between DBAs and developers so that we can include database changes within the pipeline to automate and safely secure it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about modern CD practices today, right? This book on the right-hand side came out about 15 years ago, right? Many of you were in college, high school, or like me in their career reading this, learning about continuous delivery, but it's 15 years old, right? In modern CD today, it should inspire confidence, governance that works for developers, and configuration that scales, right? If you're just working on one application, oftentimes you don't have to worry about like all the configuration, but as you scale out to an enterprise model, scaling is what really requires, right, that's full CI/CD and configuration. And where we see a lot of companies fail is in the database side, where they modernize their applications in a full CI/CD stack, but then for the database, they're still relying on slow manual process changes. Developers expect powerful pipelines today. They want it as code or point and click or a YAML file, right, or whatever configuration you're used to. And they want the advanced stuff made easy. Maybe the first time the advanced thing is, takes time to set up because you're filling out templates, configuration. But then as it's done, then you can roll it out to your developers, right? So that the advanced stuff is easy. They don't have to redo it. They can just process it again and again. And then include some manual options as well, right? So that maybe they have a golden template, but then they can, change something and adjust for an experiment or point in time thing. All right. And then ultimately, modern CD practices tie releases to monitoring and roll back automatically. So there's data-driven verification. They support progressive delivery. So if you do use feature flags, you can deploy your code into production safely with 0 customers using it. And you can slowly roll it out with a feature flag by flipping a toggle, like an on-off switch with a light switch, to one user, multiple users, geographic regions, etc. But if you look at application delivery today, these are all modern CD principles, right, that we should follow. Plus, add in some governance developers love. When I worked at Target, we didn't call it governance, we called it guidance. We wanted to empower our developers and guide them through like a yellow brick road, as my coworker would say. But today I like talking about governance and making sure developers love it, right? Because we don't want to get them in trouble. We want them to follow, the rules, especially if they're in the banking industry or fintech, where there's significant consequences. But here with modern CD, people expect policy as code. Maybe they're using Open Policy Agent, which is a CNCF open source project. They want fine-grained access control, just so they can determine like who can create pipelines, who can run them, who can delete things within a pipeline. And that all ties into audit and log history as well, because if something changed, you want to understand like how to go back and revert it if needed, or if you're meeting with the auditors from Deloitte or whoever, you can kind of show proof of what you're doing. And again, these are all modern practices that we expect. And modern DevOps at scale, right? We want to be able to reuse those pipelines, stages, and steps, make it easy to do the right thing, and scale it across the enterprise, right? And so for developers, like these pipelines, like we want to make it easy to do it right and difficult to do it wrong. And in general, like I see across the globe, like a lot of companies have done this correctly for applications at scale within CD. But like I said before, databases are an afterthought. And a few people that filled out the survey or the poll today, like I'm glad you have things, scripted in CI/CD. So I hope you can learn a few things today as we talk about databases, right? And why databases really do matter. So let's go with another poll question. Number 2, we'll pop that up on the screen as and we can kind of just talk through this as well. So, all right. All right, so for this second poll, what I want you to think about is like, what's your biggest concern when it comes to automating database changes, right? Is it breaking production or causing downtime, data loss or corruption, lack of visibility or observability, difficulty coordinating across teams, or just like not sure where to start? Right, and as I'm seeing people click into things like breaking production, causing downtime, absolutely. Maybe you are a DBA that has to manage like a database across 10 different environments. Like I'm not just talking about like staging QA production. I'm talking about environments, in different geographic regions that have different, procedures for data changes and all that you have to be cognizant of. Many developers today don't realize that. Like from an application standpoint, I'm always thinking about, rolling it out to dev, stage, QA. But I'm not really thinking about production and the multiple types of environments based upon like the data policies that are there. Let's see, difficulty coordinating across teams. Absolutely, that's always hard. Talking to people is hard, right? Especially remote if you're not all in the same room. So that's one, silo that you have to break down with databases as well. I would say, the whole DevOps movement or whatever you want to call it, broke down a lot of those silos between application teams and engineers and operations and system admins. But it always has seemed to me like database admins, and that process has been outside of that. In some cases, not, but in a lot of cases, it is, right? So it's kind of great to see how people, are shifting. I mean, what you answered, it definitely fits where you're at, and that's totally okay. All right. So moving on from that poll, I want to talk about this slide too, because sometimes, like, if you're an engineer or a DBA, like, you have to convince other people that, things need to change. And I kind of I always show this slide, just like, technology and standards change, right? So years and years and years ago, like, child car seats looked like this. It was more for, strapping them down, not maybe some safety, but also to help elevate them to look out the window of their vehicle, right? So not really safe. Even the car seat that I grew up in looked like a bathtub that was strapped to the back of this station wagon kind of a thing. But if you think about modern CD and database DevOps, like, technology and standards have changed, and we need to really shift to that as well. And just one of the CTAs that popped up too, if you click on read the blog now for later, it's a really great blog that talks about database schemas and how they slow down application delivery. So if you need some proof to show some coworkers or your boss, it's a really good blog that you can click on as well. But as I was mentioned before, databases slow everything down, and everything else is as code applications. So why not databases, right? And to me, the Happy Gilmore 2 movie came out recently on Netflix. So this is the first one, but Adam Sandler is, trying to tell the golf ball, that's your home. But database changes to me, live in Git for multiple reasons, visibility and, approval gates and rollbacks and all that kind of stuff. So why don't we do databases the same way we do applications, right? So the challenges, right? Let's talk about some database challenges just to, like, level set and align everybody as well. So just a simple thing, right? Why shipping app features often requires database changes, just to kind of, like, level set everybody. But in this very simple UI, right? Before, I have, like, create an account, username, password. But now for creating an account, I'm wanting to add, like, company and job title. But that's going to require, in most cases, like, a database schema change with that feature. So as a product manager, right, like, I'm going to have front end ticketing, right, and APIs to change and all that, but also, like, a database schema change ticket to add that. And I can't roll out this feature, this new, UI feature for account creation until I have a database schema change rolled out. And perhaps, if you can imagine, like I was saying before, this change in production is going to go across the whole globe. So maybe there's different restrictions on what data I'm collecting and have to protect. So as I roll this application change out, I'm going to have to roll the database thing out. And you can imagine, like, a lot of companies today don't have this process automated with their database. So they're working manually and coordinating the rollout of the application aligned with the database change across the globe, right? And people get used to that, and it works, and it's normal, and you kind of get stuck in that habit and get used to the pain because you don't know that there's something better or that, whatnot. So, like, this, in reality, like, today with database DevOps, it exists to do this in a better way. Right, so the three things I always like to talk about here as well. So with databases, like, slowing everything down. All right, so, like, today, like, manual database changes, right? So devs must wait for the DBA to apply schema changes to prod. And again, it's a patient wait, right? It's not like an annoying wait because you trust and you're friends with the DBA, right? They have an important job to do. But then it's, like, hard to identify root cause when database changes, like, hurt performance. So as, like, you're rolling it out and changing and doing some queries and testing, all of a sudden, like, you're seeing some bottleneck issues happening with your application, but then by now you've rolled out the database change to multiple environments. So you're trying to figure out what changed. Right, so it slows down that application release. We always talk about with modern CI/CD, like we can just write code and ship it and release it, but we always forget about like the complicated database changes that happen alongside that, right? And it's maybe not every feature, right, but it's important features, new releases that often have those database changes. The other thing I like to talk about, lack of visibility, right? So as you're rolling out these changes, you have lack of a single pane of glass like results, right? So you're just kind of like, maybe checking in with your DBA, like, hey, what environment is it out? Is it out yet? Right? You're always kind of asking, or maybe you trust, and then the next morning after the DBA has kind of rolled everything out, and you're like, okay, I'm done. But all too often, even for me, I've experienced where like, yep, features released, everything's good to go, but then all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, something happened in this one environment that I didn't check. And then you have to kind of go investigate what that happens. And hopefully that doesn't mean you have to like roll back the whole feature that just got launched, but you can kind of work with that environment that had the issue, right? And that especially happens with environment drift. As you have multiple environments in production, you can kind of see drifting happen and all that. You also just have like no guardrails with this process either, like slow manual SQL review and approval process due to lack of automated governance. Many times application teams, the developers writing some of those SQL statements and rules and, handing it off to the DBA, and the DBA is manually looking at it and reviewing it. And then sometimes different environments have different rules with what they're doing. So then they're kind of, going into that secondary layer of reviewing everything, but it just becomes super complicated, right? So then how that ends up looking, right, with this is application versus DBA silos, manual scripts running, you see production outages, rollback plans is, not too advanced these days, but oftentimes you see non-existent rollback paths. And hopefully the rollback plan isn't just to restore from backup, but ultimately these DB changes slow down application delivery. And on the right-hand side of this image, I actually have an example of a DB change process at one of the banks we've talked to, right, where the developer writes and tests the SQL, adds it to an Excel sheet for a DBA, emails it with a ticket, requesting the change and aligning the schedule, right? It's kind of like setting up a meeting almost. And then the DBA reviews the SQL. Maybe there's some trust in that what the developer wrote, or maybe not, right? So they're kind of just going through and combing, and maybe there's some automation that they have in the background to test it. But then they manually run each change on the database instant, right? And there might be like 10 or more. So this process works. It's tested in true, but it could be better, right? And when this process works, it's great. But when it breaks down and fails, it gets really, really bad. All right. So what is database DevOps at the end of the day? So database DevOps, if you think about it, it's a way to integrate your database changes into your deployment pipeline and then gain database transparency across environments, right? So you can orchestrate the database changes with your application code. Like I'm already treating, app code. So why don't I just treat my database like code? I can define database promotion rules as well. I can think about it like as GitOps, just so I can automate it even more. Also, database DevOps is really all about change visibility too, and that's really what helps break down the silos. In this picture that you see on the side, it's an example of kind of seeing your change set applied across all environments, right? In this case, you can see like green across all environments, so that's good. I don't have to talk to my DBA to ask what the status is. I can see it on my own. And then more importantly, the governance that I talked about for CD pipelines that developers have grown to expect, you can now have that with databases, right? Enforcing policies on allowed database changes, review and approve schema changes before deployment, and having role-based access and control. So you can collaborate between your DBA and app teams as well. And I just want to kind of mention a quote that we have from one of our customers too. is, we're giving that out of the box governance and change automation for like a tool like Liquibase, saving, which save them months of work with better visibility and control, right? And many people work with Liquibase or Flyway or kind of their own thing. And that's where like database DevOps is on top of that, helping provide the orchestration, visibility, and governance today that we see. All right. So how does database DevOps help? As we, I hope to show you all this in kind of the demo to talk through, but just in words, or if you want to take screenshots, what we're trying to showcase is, we clone a change log from Git, right? Database as code. We write and test that SQL. And if the developer doesn't know, like we can help you with that as well. Or the DBA can recommend, tests to run and expect in a policy. So it's not just an island for the developer. And then just as they would merge their application code to the main branch, they merge their database change alongside that in a CI/CD pipeline, right? And then what happens there is it just takes care of everything, all defined within the guardrails of what the DBA and developer has agreed with. Thus, the same expectation you have for your application getting released, you can expect with your database. And for the people on the phone, that want, a lot of words or a screenshot, but like, if you're in this belief where you're trying to convince your company, right, I want to modernize my database delivery and changes, like, why don't we just follow the best practices for CI/CD? But this is exactly what I always kind of tell people, right? Like, our CI/CD pipelines let teams ship app code safely and quickly, but for most companies, the database is still the weak link, right? So with database DevOps, it's going to close the gap with automated rollbacks, full visibility, policy-driven guardrails, right? So that developers and DBAs can finally work together in that shared pipeline, right? And if something goes wrong at the end of the day, or in one environment, you can automatically roll back the app alongside the database change in one pipeline. All right, so before I walk into my demo, I was going to have poll question number 3 as well. So for poll question 3, like, who owns database changes in your organization? Dedicated DBA database team, application developers, DevOps or platform engineering team, shared responsibility, or I don't know, kind of varies by project, which kind of makes sense based upon like which application you're working on and everything. And while I'm waiting for the poll, just for a minute or so, just looking through the questions, thanks for those that have already put in some questions. Again, feel free to ask questions or be like, hey, what did you mean by the slide or whatnot? And we'll definitely go over that. And then as another gentle reminder, in the resources tab, you can kind of download a quick 2-pager PDF on everything I've been talking about as well today. All right. So as I'm looking at the poll, let's see. So a couple, dedicated DBA or a database team makes sense. Application developers, that's great because it makes them accountable. And hopefully those developers have a process that they can follow for the database that they need to change. Like a DevOps or platform engineering team, great. I see a lot of platform engineering teams like enabling like database as a service, if you will. When I was at Target, that's kind of where our database team went. They didn't get merged in with the DevOps team per se, but they kind of became their own DevOps with that, where they provided database as a service so teams could just self-consume that as well. Shared responsibility, have a few people with that, so that's great. Shared responsibility between app and dev makes total sense. That's honestly why I'm giving this webinar, right? Because I want to bring in databases to this fold of DevOps and all that. Hence, the framework of database DevOps as well. All right, so I'm gonna switch screens over to the demo. So just give me 1 minute. We're doing really well on time, so we'll have enough time for Q&A. All right, so for the next 5-10 minutes, I'm going to just talk through our Harness database DevOps platform that we have today. And in general, like just looking at high level, like we always like to provide an overview, right? So the developer and the DBA can understand like how many schemas I have, how many instances, the most recent deployments, because you're always wondering like what changed, right? You can kind of see that, as well as just like migration states of your instances across environments as well. You can map out, your instances, see all of your instances with the migration state, which is a great visibility, like I was mentioned before. Look at your pipelines across all of your applications, validate your executions in one view, and then have database governance as well, which I'll go over in a little bit more detail. But this is where the DBA, in essence, can set up everything in their head for how databases changes should happen, so they can empower the developer to run on their own, but then still have checks and balances to make sure we're doing the right thing. So I said before, right, like everything starts as code, right? So this is our own code repository module within Harness, just like GitHub. And I have my change log here with my change set. And this is where a developer can define everything, work with the DBA as needed to set up that. Interestingly enough, right, like the title of this webinar was like helping developers author the changes. But we just launched, this blog today, actually. My amazing coworker, Animesh, and our principal product manager, Stephen Atwell, published this blog, on talking about AI and database DevOps, of course, but how we can help developers like author their own changes and everything. And I'm just going to drop this in the chat. So if you want to copy and paste this new blog, you can do that as well. But it kind of goes over like change sets, right? And a lot of people are writing scripts, sure, but how do you actually take a change set? And what we did in this blog for the time being is just wrote kind of a sample app so people can learn with reading of the blog. So for example, if the developer wants to just like add a column name email, this is just an example, but you can describe your prompt here, hit submit, and then you'll get your change set, right? So now a developer who's maybe used to writing scripts or not, right, can also kind of just put in this context what they're trying to do to get a change set that we can apply in a pipeline. And if you have an existing change log too, you can put that in as optional, and it'll create the change set that you can use. So in essence, this helps developers kind of move to that next step, right? Empowering them to learn how to do it themselves and then check it and validate that it works. So again, looking at the change log with the change set in there, feel free to read the blog and experiment with this as you learn how to, work with change sets and everything like that. So the other part of the demo that I was going to talk through here as well is just like the end-to-end pipeline that can be provided as well. So there's a lot of icons on this screen, but once you set it up once with a template, this is where you can give and empower your developer to push the application and database change through all of your environments, right? So in this case, I'm, building, testing my artifact, the CI process of it, spinning up a dev cluster with like infrastructure as code, deploying my changes to the dev environment, as well as doing like security testing as well. But here, when I deploy to dev, you can see now I have this database DevOps pipeline where I'm actually initializing it all the way to cloning the code base, importing the change set that I was showing before, previewing, validating the SQL with testing, and then tagging it so you can understand like what databases changes you're rolling out. And this is important for rollback. You can have tag and applying the schema, right? So now, before, like in a regular application CD pipeline, I might not have had this at all, right? Or maybe I would have manually wired something together. But now I have it continuously through, build, test, deploy my application code, change the database and the environment, and then roll it out, right? And let's not forget about like updating the Jira ticket or ServiceNow ticket within that as well. But then, once it graduates all these stages, it's going to get promoted to QA and eventually production. And then in production, I have, again, the same database DevOps pipeline that's here. But it might be a little different because again, I'm in production. So maybe I have different tests that I'm running based upon the environments, or I want to do different things. But again, it's this end-to-end pipeline that we provide for applications and databases. And you might ask, like, do you need to use this whole platform? And the answer is no. You can independently use database DevOps with other tools as well. So if you've manually built your own CI/CD, you can plop in database DevOps here as well. Or if you use other tools, you can integrate with that as well. All right. So secondly, with this demo too, another blog that's in here as well, and I'm just going to put that in the chat if you want to copy and paste later. But my coworker Steven wrote this to talk about automation of authoring, like a step-by-step with the Harness pipeline, right? What's really great about this is you can sync, the development across the environments. So you don't have to, again, like the developer doesn't have to know everything that they need to do. We can actually take a difference between environments to match the SQL that we need to make the change set to implement it. So again, this pipeline that we create has a lot of steps in it, but again, it becomes this template that you can orchestrate again and again and again with consistency, right, and automation and rollback. So here in this case, right, I have my whole where I'm taking the diff and matching it and then implementing and orchestrating the schema change as well. And if I zoom out a little bit, you kind of see this process and workflow where you're snapshotting the authoring, taking the diff, marking the authoring, and then testing the rollback. So again, before a developer might have had to do this himself, working hand in hand with the DBA, but now the DBA and the developer can put this in the pipeline to automate, run, and test it as well. One other thing just to talk about as well, I have a bunch of videos that are always linked to our blogs that my coworkers have produced, but I won't have a demo of this, but here I can actually set up policies, for example, that kind of showcase like the following policy set was adhered to enforce naming conventions. So circling back to the policies, this is where DBAs can put in new policies. Maybe there's a best practice or a naming convention, or like I want to prevent data drops, which is a big no-no, or anything like that. So then you can have those policies, you can create policy sets that apply that action. And then the DBA can also look at evaluations just to see if those policies are being enforced. And they don't have to manually go into the UI to look. They can, report on that and automate that as well. And that's where if I go here, you can see some other example policies that we've created. I just took a different screenshot, but the DBA can set up as many as they want, just to help the developer guide through the process of doing that change. So maybe it's, must have created, maybe the table that they're creating must have created by, maybe it has to have last modified. All the details that you want to put in there can be in a policy, again, just to enable the developer to do the right thing and make it hard to do the wrong thing. All right. So, we talked through, modern CD delivery and how that applies to database DevOps and the problems that we're seeing in the industry. And, this slide that I showed before with, a sad database character. Now, hopefully we can make databases part of DevOps, right? And that's what database DevOps is meant to do for that. And just as like a reminder, software delivery needs an AI solution. Like today, many companies are using Windsurf Cursor for planning and coding, but Harness provides that for the outer loop of software delivery for tests, secure, deploy, and optimize as well. So with the time left, I was going to jump into Q&A and send, a thank you. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, there's a QR code, as well as if you want to book a meeting on my Google Calendar, you're always welcome to do that as well. So and if you click on the pop-up there as well, you'll see if you want to get a demo from myself and coworkers, feel free to click on that link and we will have a personalized demo for you as well. All right, so please ask some questions. I'm gonna go through the current list of things. So let's see. So I'll just display the first question here. So what kind of teams or roles benefit most from unifying application and database deployments? Right. So we talked about this as well, but like DevOps teams that have mastered CI/CD for applications, pulling in databases is definitely that next step, right? They've maybe gotten used to not working with databases in that way, but now they can, just the same way they work in a CI/CD pipeline, they can work with databases as well. So good question. All right, we'll display the next one. What are some common mistakes teams make when automating database changes? Yeah, so a lot of mistakes are around like testing, right? So maybe they're not doing testing when they're rolling it out, or they're doing it inconsistently across environments. But that's where you can put your tests as code and make it as a template to make it consistent across different environments, as well as set up policies that the DBA can put, to guide you or govern you to do the right thing. So that's like one of the common mistakes of that. Another common mistake is just like they start and then they didn't get something to work, so then they just stop entirely and go back to the old ways. So again, usually that happens when they don't have a tool to orchestrate it. So that's why a lot of people have worked with Harness for database DevOps. All right. And if somebody already has a manual database deployment process, what's the easiest first step to modernize it? Besides just talking to us, like we can help. But the easiest first step is just to kind of, I always like writing down my process just to see what I can automate and what maybe I shouldn't. And then just kind of mapping it out, working with the teams to kind of say like, here's the portions that I'm going to start automating first, second, third, and kind of roll it out just like you would a feature to customers. Like you're rolling out this, change in process to your customers, which are the developers. All right. And then how does integrating database changes improve like confidence and all that? So like I remember the days when we were like at Target and before when we were first going through CI/CD. And at first, it was kind of scary, right? Releasing things on Friday night, but then eventually you got confident that you could make a change, let it ship, and it would, magically go into production, and you were confident. But again, at the time, databases were always kind of handled separately. But when you incorporate database changes into CI/CD, you do have more confidence, right? Especially with the visibility across different environments with your instances. So when you can see it and know that it's happening, you can put in, Jira tickets into your process just so you have it documented for audits. And you can be confident that you're following the policies that your DBA set up, and also know that you can also roll back entirely or per environment. So it definitely helps with that as well. So we're there. I'm just going to check some other thing. All right. Couple new questions, just hitting some buttons to display. Is there an option to execute the DB scripts based on environment? Yeah, 100%. So per environment, especially if you have more, you can do different things. So you can imagine like in a QA environment, you're rolling out a change and then you're waiting for it to complete, and then it can get promoted into the next environment that maybe has some different rules. So you can set that up specifically for each environment as well. That's a great question. Thanks for that. And feel free, drop some questions as we go here. All right. Approved, and I will show this. Okay. And then somebody asked, besides the structural changes, how the data for the DB migration, which is often in, how it can be managed. So there's schema changes. where you're adding, different, fields. So database DevOps can help with that. And then if there's like infrastructure changes, if that's maybe what's asking, like structural, you can use like infrastructure as code management, like a Terraform to coincide with that. So you're changing the infrastructure as well as the schema that's supporting that. But if that didn't answer your question, feel free to like connect with me on LinkedIn with that QR code, and happy to dive into that more with a hands-on demo as well. All right. Looks like we have one more question, but always happy to keep saying one more question. All right. How does Harness help you roll back changes where data has changed? I assume that you need to build and rollback scripts that can be used. Yeah, so we have rollbacks that we can include. So similar to our CI/CD pipeline for applications, we have built-in rollback strategies for applications. So with Database DevOps, we have rollback strategies that you can incorporate. The complicated ones with rollback, we can script that out. And then if it needs to change per environment, that can be customized. And then if there's data that's changing where you have to move the data around, we partner with some other great companies like Portworx. And we actually have a demo we have a blog and a demo on that too, where we're actually working with data changes, migrations, and then schema changes. And my coworker, he spoke at KubeCon last year on that as well, which is a great presentation. So I don't have a link to that here, but if you go to our blogs that you already have access to, you can kind of see all the blogs that we have and kind of click into data migration for that. But great question. All right. For that. But yeah, we have everybody's contact information. So we'll be able to send all the links that we have in this webinar to you with an additional resource for all the videos and blogs on that. But again, if you go to the resources tab, there's a great PDF that we built that kind of talks through all of our capabilities, as well as the pop-up that just came up if you want to get a demo. I'll see that, and my coworker and I will connect with you soon when you're available to kind of work through all that with you. But with that, I don't have any more slides, and I've appreciated the last 48 minutes with everything that you've done. So thanks for the great questions. Thanks for answering the polls, and I look forward to talking with you about Database DevOps. So thank you, everybody.